morning, everyone. Bonjour. Thank you for joining us. Is it on? Yeah. Okay. Good morning. Bonjour. Thank you for joining us today for this technical briefing on the Transit Long Range Financial Plan. Merci de vous être rejoint à nous aujourd'hui pour cette séance d'information technique sur le plan financier à long terme.
Thank you for joining us today for this technical briefing on Transit Long Range Financial Plan.
The peoples of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation have lived on this territory for millennia. Their culture and presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land. The City of Ottawa honors the peoples and land of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation. The City of Ottawa honors all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people and their valuable past and present contributions to this land. On behalf of the city,
Au nom de la ville, j'aimerais maintenant accueillir le maire Sutcliffe, les conseillers, les membres du personnel et des médias et les résidents qui nous suivent en ligne. Cette séance vise à présenter aux membres du Conseil une mise à jour sur la situation financière de la ville et de son service de transport en commun. Même si cette information pourra éclairer la prise de décision future, aucune décision ne sera prise aujourd'hui. Le dernier plan financier à long terme remonte à 2019 et depuis, le paysage économique a beaucoup changé. Le personnel fera un survol des pressions budgétaires actuelles, des changements survenus depuis 2019, des facteurs sous-jacents et des solutions qui seraient nécessaires pour gérer les pressions. Une copie de la présentation d'aujourd'hui sera remise au Conseil et aux médias après la présentation. Alors, aujourd'hui, le maire Max Sutcliffe, qui est aussi président du Comité des finances, vous adressera la parole.
Cyril Rogers, Interim General Manager and Chief Financial Officer for the Finance and Corporate Services Department. And presenting on behalf of the Finance and Corporate Services Department is Isabel Jasmine, Deputy City Treasurer, Corporate Finance. Also here, available for questions today are Renee Amilcar, General Manager, Transit Services Department, Pat Scrimger, Director, Transit Customer Systems and Planning, Transit Services Department, and Jennifer Armstrong, Program Manager, Transportation Policy and Networks, Planning, Real Estate, and Economic Development Department. After the briefing, I will open the floor for questions from Council and we'll go in ward order. And we want to give everyone an opportunity to ask their questions in the allotted time frame. So we'll ask that councillors limit to one question and one follow-up. And if you require further information or have additional questions, staff will be happy to follow up with you after the briefing. And then media relations have some microphones that they'll bring over to you for the questions, so you can remain in your seats. And then once all members of council have asked questions, we'll go to the media briefing as well. And with that, I'll hand it over to Mayor Sutcliffe.
Thank you, Glenn. Bonjour tout le monde. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us at this very important meeting. Over the past few years, like many Ottawa residents and OC Transpo passengers, I've been frustrated and even embarrassed by the developments around our public transit system. It's one of the reasons that I decided just over a year ago to change careers and go into politics. And during the election campaign last year, and since I became mayor 10 months ago, I listened carefully to the concerns of residents, and it's very clear the people of Ottawa want a safe, reliable, and affordable public transit system. Les résidents d'Ottawa veulent un système de transport en commun sûr, fiable.
The residents of Ottawa want a safe and affordable system.
Outside perspective to issues like public transit. And now I'm learning that the picture is much worse than what I feared. But I still believe, and I am still confident, that we can find solutions. We as members of council have a duty and a responsibility to work together productively and collaboratively to make the decisions required to protect and sustain our incredibly important public transit system. En tant que membres du Conseil, nous avons le devoir.
As members of council, we have a duty and responsibility to work together productively and collaboratively to make the decisions required to protect and sustain our incredibly important public transit system.
Now, it's no secret that municipalities are facing enormous financial issues, and public transit, of course, is one of the biggest challenges. It's also no surprise that a great deal has changed since the pandemic began. Construction and operating costs are rising dramatically, and significantly fewer people are using public transit. Rising costs and declining ridership are happening everywhere. But in Ottawa, the gap is particularly pronounced because the people working for our largest employer, the federal government, are still working from home several days every week. So it won't be a shock to any of you that the result of that is a worsening financial picture for OC Transpo. As Glenn mentioned, the last time that we did a long-range financial plan for transit was in 2019. That was before the pandemic, and it was before the many, many lessons that we learned from the implementation of phase one of light rail. So it's an understatement to say that a lot has changed since then. The next time we would normally receive an update is in 2025 as part of the Transportation Master Plan. But given how much has changed, and given how important public transit is to our city, and given the big decisions that we face as a council, I asked for and received an update from city staff. I simply didn't think we could continue making decisions about transit based on forecasts that were created before the pandemic and before the launch of phase one. Too much has changed, and there's too much at stake. Étant donné l'ampleur des changements et l'importance de transport en commun pour notre ville, j'ai demandé et j'ai obtenu une mise à jour de la part du personnel municipal. Je ne pensais tout simplement pas que nous pouvions continuer à prendre des décisions concernant les transports en commun sur la base des prévisions établies avant la pandémie et avant le lancement de la première phase. From that briefing, I learned just how much the numbers have changed.
Et j'ai donc appris que les chiffres ont beaucoup changé. Alors, je ne veux pas divulguer.
We now know just how much it costs to operate light rail. We now know just how many challenges there are in operating the system, and it will take a long time to rebuild the confidence of riders. We now know how much the pandemic is changing our city and the use of public transit. Just as one example, we often quote where we stand in ridership right now compared to 2019 levels. But the previous long-range financial plan assumed that in 2023, we would be well beyond 2019 levels in ridership, that we would have significantly increased ridership by now. Obviously, that's not happening. I promise to approach transit and all issues at City Hall with improved transparency. And with the 2024 budget process underway and big decisions ahead of us on transit, I thought it was vitally important that this new information be shared as soon as possible with members of council and with the public. J'ai promis d'aborder la question des transports en commun ainsi que toutes les
I
questions.
promise to approach transit and all issues at City Hall with improved transparency. And with the 2024 budget process underway and big decisions ahead about transit, I thought it was vitally important that the new information be shared as soon as possible with members of council and the public.
Public transport is vitally important to our city and to our future. Ottawa is changing rapidly, and our population is growing. There are enormous social, economic, and environmental benefits to building a safe, reliable, and affordable transit system for our residents. Good public transit reduces congestion and emissions. It improves social equity. It contributes to a stronger economy, and it helps us build a better city for everyone. Light rail, in particular, is a transformative new system for Ottawa. Despite all the troubles that we've had, light rail is a game-changing and a city-building project that will transform Ottawa for generations. It will shape all the major decisions that we make about where to locate homes and businesses and attractions. So public transit is essential to the future of Ottawa. Therefore, we must have the best information available in order to make the right decisions. The numbers in the long-range financial plan are significantly different from before the pandemic, but our immediate work remains largely the same. For the next year or two, we must do a few critical things. We must fix phase one of light rail. We must continue to open future phases of light rail. And we must stabilize and improve our bus system so that we can continue to build public transit in the years ahead. Nous devons réparer la première phase du train léger. Nous devons continuer.
So we must fix the first phase of the light rail. We must continue to open future phases of light rail, and we must stabilize and improve our bus system so that we can continue to build public transit in years ahead.
These are not small challenges, but I am confident that by working together, the team at OC Transpo, the leadership at Ottawa City Hall, my colleagues on Ottawa City Council and I, and indeed the entire City of Ottawa, can address these issues and build a strong and stable public transit system for the next 25 years. I want to reiterate a very important point. Cities all over Canada and throughout North America are experiencing challenges with public transit. But Ottawa's situation is unique for two important reasons. First, the decisions of the federal government of Canada are having a direct impact on our ridership levels. Listen, that's not a comment on whether public servants should work from home several days a week. That's between the federal government and its employees. It is simply a statement of fact that because they are doing so, our ridership is down. And second, Ottawa has a dramatically different funding model from Toronto and other municipalities in Southern Ontario for transit. The provincial government is paying the full construction and life cycle maintenance costs for major light rail projects in not just Toronto, but Hamilton, Kitchener, and Brampton. We don't get the same deal. Le gouvernement provincial paye les coûts complets de
The provincial government is paying the full construction and life cycle maintenance cost for major light rail projects in not just Toronto, but Hamilton, Kitchener, in Brampton. We don't get the same deal.
For those two reasons, I believe Ottawa is more than justified in asking for and receiving significant and targeted help from the federal and provincial governments to support our public transit in the years ahead. We must get this support. We simply must. Those conversations have already begun, and I will work as hard as I can to ensure that they continue. I'm also going to point out the challenges of long-range forecasting. What you're about to see today is a 25-year plan, a plan that stretches all the way into the middle of this century. So it's built on a number of assumptions, and many of those assumptions may change over time. It's based on the current economic, social, and demographic realities of our city, and we could see changes to all of those in the coming years. And given the rapid change in technology, many things may be different from now, may be different in 10 years, let alone in 25 years. Some parts of the picture may get better, some may get worse, but this is the best information that we have available to us today. This plan also includes every decision made by the previous council, every project that we hope to do in the next 25 years. So we must act now to stabilize and protect our system. We must make responsible, not reckless decisions about public transit. We must think long-term and not short-term so that we can continue to fund and support public transit for many years to come. Some of the steps we must take include fixing phase one of light rail, including not just the axles, but any other issue that could present future problems. Ensuring the safe and smooth launch of phase two, including high levels of transparency about testing. continuing the route review and optimization of our bus service. Given how much travel patterns have changed, we need more buses in some areas and fewer in others. Experimenting with new solutions like on-demand transit. Working hard on our budget so that we don't have big deficits in transit going forward. Finding ways to get more people living and working and visiting attractions downtown. Having difficult but important conversations with other levels of government about their important and vital and necessary role in the future of transit in Ottawa.
Wow.
I'm pleased to say that all this work has already begun.
Je dois dire que tous,
Chair Gower and I will be bringing a direction to committee and council in the coming weeks. We will ask staff to explore all the mitigation options that will be outlined in today's presentation. We will also ask for council to set up an internal working group on transit to explore ways to increase revenue and ridership and build a path to sustainability. Many options and solutions are on the table. Downtown revitalization, building housing near transit stations, new sources of revenue, and more. I also feel strongly that we need more frequent information on transit. So I would like to see an update from staff on possible options for mitigation no later than the second quarter of next year. To members of council, I want to say very clearly, we have been handed an enormous challenge. Wherever I go in the city, people often say to me, as they may say to you, you inherited a mess. And I'll be honest, I'm not thrilled about this financial picture, nor some of the decisions that led to it. Partout où je vais dans la ville, les gens me disent souvent, vous avez hérité d'un désordre.
everywhere I go in the city, people tell me I inherited a mess. And honestly, I'm not thrilled about this financial picture or some of the decisions that led to it.
We cannot revisit the past, but we can change the future. If we make the right decisions, the next long-range financial plan for transit can look better. It's not going to happen with one big move. It's not going to happen overnight. But a series of thoughtful and careful steps that will gradually and incrementally improve the picture are necessary. We've been handed an enormous challenge and an enormous responsibility. So let's work together to make those important decisions. Let's take this one step at a time. This is the beginning of a very difficult conversation, but a very important one. We need to plan for the future. We need to be honest with residents about what we can do and also what we can't do. We need to have a frank conversation with upper levels of government about what we need from them to make transit work. To our residents, I want to say, this is the beginning of an honest conversation with you about what we can do and what we can't do. But I repeat, public transit is vitally, vitally important. A vitally important service that we will protect and preserve. And we will do that through thoughtful, careful, strategic, long-term decisions. Le transport en commun est un service essentiel.
Public transit is vitally important service that we will protect and preserve with thoughtful, careful, and strategic long-term decisions.
And as I have promised before, I will not rest until you have the light rail system you deserve and the public transit system you deserve. That's why I'm here. So let's begin that important discussion. Let's change the future. Let's protect and enhance public transit for the next 25 years. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Mayor Sutcliffe. Our next speaker is City Manager Wendy Stephenson.
Thank you very much, Chair Gower, and good morning, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. My thanks to Mayor Sutcliffe, to Chair Gower, to members of council, and staff and media for being here today. One of the commitments that I made when I came into the role as interim city manager and now as city manager was to increase the accountability and transparency, both within our organization as well as externally to the public. We wanted to bring you together today to present you with an update on the transit long-range financial plan in order to ensure that council, along with media and our residents, had the latest information on the current financial landscape specifically related to transit. And this is of particular importance to members of council, as you're going to be making decisions that are going to affect the future of transit in our city, and it's critical for you to have the complete picture of our current landscape. The long-range financial plan is a comprehensive assessment of the city's ability to afford planned transit capital projects based on a forecast of all transit-related revenues, operating costs, capital expenditures, out to 2048, based on the decisions of previous council. And the city's first LRP for transit was tabled in 2011. We've had subsequent updates in 2012 and 2013, and that really was to inform council in terms of what was happening with stage one in the contract, as well as the decisions in our last transportation master plan. Further updates were done in 2017 and 2019 to inform council with respect to stage two and really set that funding stage with respect to stage three. And, due to the city's financial reality, that really requires government funding from upper levels of government of 100% to implement and operate in the future. And as many of us are aware, and as Mayor Sutcliffe has mentioned, you're going to hear this from Cyril. There's been several factors since the pandemic that have had a significant impact on the budget pressures that we're currently facing in terms of transit. And our new economic realities have changed that financial outlook since our last forecast that we tabled in 2019. We're facing some costs and some shortfalls. We have decreased funding and we have increased costs. And this is the reason that we are acting now to find solutions to balance our responsibilities of being fiscally responsible while providing effective, safe, and reliable transit services. And I'd really like to take the opportunity this morning to thank city staff, to thank Cyril, to thank Renee, Pat, Jennifer, and Isabel, who are here today to share their insights with you. I also want to thank staff who are going to be working hard to examine the recommended potential mitigation measures over the coming months. This conversation is going to be uncomfortable, but we cannot put our heads in the sand. We need to plan for the future. We need to be real with residents on what we can accomplish, and most importantly, have a very open and honest conversation with upper levels of government about the challenges that we face. It's our goal to ensure that we provide safe and reliable transit service, and it meets the needs of our residents, both now and in the future. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Wendy. Our next speaker is Cyril Rogers.
Good morning. I would like to thank Mayor Sutcliffe, Chair Gower, Wendy, members of council in attendance, and my colleagues with me here today to present an update on the Transit Long-Range Financial Plan. In a moment, Isabel will be sharing the latest information on the long-term financial outlook for transit in our city. Since our last update to the Transit Long-Range Financial Plan in 2019, we've experienced significant impacts over the last few years due to economic impacts driven by the pandemic. We've seen a shift in hybrid workforce, lower ridership, higher inflation costs, higher interest costs, and increased operational and maintenance costs related to the system. This new reality has made the assumptions used to build the financial forecast in 2019 change substantially. We've had to be patient in developing a new model as we continue to adjust to the new reality of transit in our city and beyond. You'll see in a moment that the modeling, which provides financial projections out to 2048, shows an affordability gap that will require several decisions in the coming years. Mitigation options will need to be considered, and we're prepared to inform you of the pertinent information as we do so together. Today's update is timely. It's important that we inform members of council of the projections while reassuring you that in the coming months and the years ahead, several plans and studies will need to be revised to align to the city's transportation growth and climate change needs. You'll have many decisions to make on transit and how we fund it, beginning with the 2024 budget, the 2024 development charge background study, transit asset plans, zero emission bus program, and a new transportation master plan that will come in 2025. Following the presentation, we're happy to answer any questions you may have. I would like now to pass it over to Isabel, who will walk you through the presentation. Merci.
Thank you, Cyril. Next slide. So I'm pleased to be here today to provide an update on the transit affordability model. Je suis heureuse d'être ici aujourd'hui pour faire le point sur le modèle
I'm very happy to be here to talk to you about the accessibility model for transit.
Plan is updated to provide information valuable in the decision-making process. The Transit Long-Range Financial Plan is one of the most comprehensive financial plans we prepare for management and for council. Transit sources of funding are dedicated to transit services, and for that reason, we can be more complete in our analysis of affordability, taking into consideration projected revenues, operating costs, and capital investment requirements for the next 25 years to 2048. The primary sources of revenue come from fare revenue, transit tax, government funding, gas tax, and development charges. The affordability model that supports this plan projects these revenues for 30 years and the operating costs for all aspects of transit services, including bus, rail, paratranspo, and general and administrative costs. It also captures all capital requirements for transit, including life cycle costs, renewal of transit structures, and growth projects as described in the 2013 Transportation Master Plan to build a livable city, such as bus rapid transit routes, light rail, and transit priority projects. The first long-range financial plan, or we call LRFP, was developed in 2011. The LRFP has been updated with each major investment and updates in the city transit plans. First in 2012 to determine the affordability of stage 1 of light rail, then again in 2013 to assess the affordability of the Transportation Master Plan. In 2017 to include stage 2 estimates, and lastly in 2019 to confirm the continued affordability of stage 2 after the contract price was confirmed at $4.6 billion. It was at that time it was determined that stage 3 would only be affordable if it was funded 100% from senior levels of government. In previous LRFPs, staff have provided an assessment of affordability and a funding strategy to ensure the continued affordability of transit services. The information provided today does not include a funding strategy for affordability. It is simply an update on the affordability model, since so many economic and operating factors have changed since 2019. Les informations fournies aujourd'hui n'incluent pas de stratégie de financement.
The information provided today doesn't include the funding strategy. It's really just an update on affordability because major economic and operational factors have changed since 2019.
As we enter into our 2024 budget process and stage 2 becomes operational. As we prepare for the development charge background study to be updated in the spring of 2024. And as we are in the process of updating the Transportation Master Plan and transit asset plans by 2025. Many decisions will be made about transit services in the next several years, and awareness of where we stand financially with our current plans and using the affordability model to assess the financial implications of updating those plans will help to guide us going forward. The affordability model update we are providing today is not a realistic model. It simply provides a baseline assessment of where we are financially and assess the affordability of our current plans and the financial gap that will grow over the next 30 years if we don't change them. Next slide. Since 2019, we've been updating the affordability model, but it has not been stable enough to properly estimate the key metrics driving the transit financial model. We are here today because the picture for transit is becoming a little clearer, but it is important to note that these are just projections based on best information we have today, and the financial picture may change. Since 2019, transit ridership has been significantly impacted by the slow return to work after the pandemic shutdowns. Also, inflation has increased beyond what we were predicting in the 2019 model. Interest rates have also increased. And we have much greater insight now into what it costs to operate rail. Next slide. This graph provides an overview of the operating cost pressures over the next 4 years. These are new additional costs that will be added in each of those years, and added together, they show the cumulative impact on the transit operating budget by 2027, which is the final year when Stage 2 is fully implemented. Ce graphique donne un aperçu des pressions sur les
This graph gives an oversight of pressures over the next 4 years. So these are additional costs which will add to costs during each of the years. And taken together, they show the cumulative impact on the operation budget between now and 2027, which is the last year of Stage 2 and when it will be fully operational.
As we continue to catch up from reductions made in 2022 and 2023. And Line 2 of rail will be fully operational. A negative budget pressure is cumulative. If you don't address the negative budget pressure in 1 year or only solve it with one-time solutions, the pressure gets added to the next year. An example is the increase in the contribution to capital in 2024. The 2023 budget included a one-time reduction in capital to defer capital projects. It helped to reduce the pressure in 2023, but it comes back in 2024, where more one-time solutions will need to be applied and so on until we are able to catch up by making operational or technology changes or increase revenue to gradually bring it back up. Only permanent ongoing changes on either the revenue or cost side will reduce these pressures permanently. The most significant cost pressures in the next few years are to pay for rail. Debt charges primarily in the form of development charge debt and gas tax debt to pay for Stage 2, and the cost to operate rail will add more budget pressures each year as Stage 2 comes online between now and 2026. The original business case for Stage 1 and 2 relied on increased ridership revenue, which has not materialized. In the short time Stage 1 was operational prior to the pandemic, the ridership numbers were increasing at the pace that the original business case estimated, but then the pandemic stopped all of that. The other category mostly includes bus costs. The increases aren't as significant for these, and in 2026, we are projecting bus savings as Line 2 becomes operational. Next slide. Throughout this presentation, I will be comparing the 2019 affordability model project, the 2019 affordability model to the revised projections in 2023. It is helpful to set the baseline and explain here what assumptions were used in 2019 when the model was affordable. And throughout the presentation, I will explain what has changed. In the 2019 model, ridership was estimated to be 112 million rides annually by 2023, after the implementation of Stage 1 light rail. For the few months after go live and prior to the pandemic, there was an increase of 2.7%. Transit tax was estimated to increase with inflation for transit service operations. This 3% was based on pre-pandemic estimates of inflation. Since then, inflation has increased significantly and the cost trajectory has changed. Fare increases were to be maintained at 2.5%, and development charge revenues were assumed to be 80% of what was assumed in the background study. Actual revenues are typically lower than what is estimated in the study. In 2019, we updated the model to ensure affordability of the increased price for Stage 2 of $4.6 billion, and Stage 3 became no longer affordable, and staff then added in an assumption that it would have to be 100% funded from senior levels of government. Next slide. So this slide provides a summary of all the key financial factors that have changed since 2019 that have either a positive or negative impact on the affordability of transit. Here we highlight the net change in revenue and expenses from 2019 to 2023, and the net overall change for key elements. Keeping in mind that 2019 was affordable and balanced, the 2023 update shows a $6.6 billion decline in affordability over the next 25 years to 2048. This is a 30-year model that we have been updating for the past 5 years and now includes 5 years of actual results and 25 years of projected costs and revenues. In this presentation, I will focus on the line items with an asterisk, which are the financial factors that had the most significant impact in projections over the last 3 years. Dans cette présentation, je me concentrerai sur les éléments marqués du
In this presentation, I'll be focusing on the financial factors which have brought about the biggest changes in forecasts over the past 3 years.
Revenue was impacted by the decline in ridership and fare freezes and decreased over the 30-year term by $3.7 billion. Development charges will likely increase in the next DC study to account for the increase in the Stage 2 project. We have only assumed a 25% increase here for estimation purposes, but even that would not be sufficient to pay for the planned growth per the 2013 TMP, which is the Transportation Master Plan. Bus costs are highlighted here, not because of any significant projected increases, but more to highlight the bus costs are not the most significant pressure going forward. The bus cost estimates increased $500 million over 30 years. The estimated cost of rail has increased significantly since 2019 by $1.4 billion over 30 years. We now have several years of experience operating Stage 1, and the costs are projected to be higher than initially estimated for a variety of reasons that I will explain later. Stage 3 was the biggest change both in construction and in operating costs. We continue to assume that Stage 3 construction would have to be funded 100% from senior levels of government, and therefore it has a minimal net impact in terms of capital cost. The most significant impact is the $1.1 billion increase in the cost of operating Stage 3, now that we know more about what it takes to operate and maintain rail. And finally, bus rapid transit and transit priority growth projects described in the 2013 Transportation Master Plan as the affordable network are no longer affordable, and were not affordable even prior to the pandemic. We've included all of the projects identified in the 2013 TMP and continue to assume 2/3 government funding for bus rapid transit projects. A few other items on this list worth mentioning here. We did include an estimate of what the city would receive in funding, estimated at $75 million annually from the Federal Permanent Transit Fund, using current gas tax funding formulas, but it is impossible to know how much will be allocated to Ottawa. Also, the transit tax projection increased by $1.3 billion over the projection period, solely due to the tax increases in 2020 to 2022 of 6.4%, 4.6%, and 4.5% respectively, adding $1.3 billion to the 30-year projection. All other assumptions remain the same, with an average 3% transit tax increase going forward and 1 to 1.5% growth rate. Next slide. So this graph compares the black line, which was the 2019 projection of ridership, and the colored lines, which represent 4 ridership scenarios that staff considered for this 2023 update. The 2019 LRFP estimated that ridership would get to 112 million rides by 2023 and 142.5 million by 2030. These were the affordable levels of ridership. For the 2023 LRFP update, staff developed and analyzed several ridership scenarios from low impact from the pandemic on ridership to an extreme impact. A very high impact scenario was used as the basis for this 2023 update. In the very high impact scenario, ridership is forecast to return to pre-pandemic levels by 2030. This projection is in line with a recent study completed by the City of Montreal, where they are projecting ridership to return to pre-pandemic levels over a 10-year timeframe. Each scenario primarily impacted projected fare revenue and bus hour costs. Each year since the pandemic, we have been comparing current ridership to pre-pandemic levels, but we should be comparing to where we thought we would be in the current year based on ridership estimates that were used as the basis for an affordable plan. We are continuing to invest in light rail, and soon we will incur the cost of operating Stage 2 of light rail without the ridership that was required to make it affordable. Today, ridership for buses stand at approximately 73% of capacity, but rail is only at 43%. Assuming that ridership returns to pre-pandemic levels in 2030, the impact on the affordability model has been a $3.7 billion reduction in revenue over the 30 years, based on an estimated 43 million fewer rides per year on average over that period of time. That equates to 101 million in lost fare revenue annually on a net present value basis. It is also important to note that fare freezes have a cumulative impact on fare revenue projections, and 2 years of fare freezes have reduced overall fare revenue in the model by $430 million over the 30-year period. Next slide. Bus costs are projected based on estimated bus service hours. This graph shows the changes in bus service hour estimates for each of the past long-range financial plans in 2011, 2014, 2017, 19, and 2023. The costs to operate the bus transit system have increased by $500 million over the period 2023 to 2048. This is due primarily to higher costs for paratranspo to align with growth in ridership for this service, and from legislative changes mandated by the Canada Labour Code for staff breaks and sick days, for a combined total increase of $1 billion. These increases are offset by a reduction in conventional bus costs of $500 million over the 30 years. The reduction of bus service hours aligns with the revised very high impact ridership forecasts. The 2019 LRFP assumed an average of 2.4 million bus hours per year, and the revised estimates for the 2023 projections assume 2.29 million hours on average per year. This equates to a $14 million reduction in conventional bus costs per year in net present value terms. Also based on the city's experience with stage 1, bus savings originally estimated for stage 2 LRT are projected to be less. Next slide. The 2019 LRFP only included a portion of stage 3 costs of construction. Only $1.5 billion was included in the last LRFP, and it was spread evenly over the 30 years. Recent plans for stage 3 have been pushing for construction to start once stage 2 is completed. This updated LRFP expands on the scope of stage 3 to include all extensions currently contemplated. The cost included for all future LRT is now $7.4 billion in 2023 dollars to extend line 1 to Barrhaven, line 3 to Canada and Hazeldean or Stittsville, and $1.1 billion for a Carling light rail line. Both the 2019 LRFP and this 2023 update assume that 100% government funding will be required to construct stage 3. Therefore, from a net capital funding requirement perspective, there is very little impact on the affordability model. The more significant impact of stage 3 on the affordability model was the cost to operate and maintain these extensions. Stage 3 would add an estimated $64 million annual operating cost with only a small offsetting bus savings, since it would only be replacing a few routes, and the increase in ridership would be minimal compared to what was expected for stage 1 and 2.
Stage 3 will add extra costs of $64 million and will not be made up for by the small savings gained from buses.
The business case for stage 1 and 2 LRT highlighted the financial, economic, and environmental benefits of light rail, particularly with the implementation of the downtown Ottawa Transit Tunnel. The project was designed to respond to the growth of the city and provide increased transit capacity into the city's core. The need for the project was based on the Transportation Master Plan analysis that indicated that over the planning period, our population would increase by 30%. Population continues to increase, but the sources of revenue for transit operations and capital investments for growth are not keeping pace. Furthermore, the cost of transit has increased from early estimates. After several years of operating stage 1, we were able to produce much more accurate estimates of cost to operate rail for this 2023 LRFP update. This table shows the total estimated annual cost of operating rail for stage 1 and 2 combined in 2027, which is the year in which we expect the first full year of stage 2 operations. The total cost that was estimated in 2019 of $165.5 million annually is now closer to $210.7 million annually, an increase of $45 million. This additional cost of rail was supposed to be paid for by bus savings and increased ridership, some of which will be realized and some of which will not. The increase in rail operating cost estimates are primarily due to higher support costs required based on stage 1 experience for staff and external expert resourcing related to engineering, analytics, instructors, managers, regulation, station attendants, and more. Maintenance costs have increased due to indexing, inflation, and contract variations. And Trillium energy cost estimates have been increased to account for more liters per kilometer for the larger trains and increased diesel fuel costs. Next slide. As I mentioned earlier, for the 2023 LRFP, we included all the projects that were contemplated in the 2013 Transportation Master Plan to show that our current plan is now unaffordable. This slide shows all of the bus rapid transit projects that would be needed by 2031 to accommodate future growth as identified in the 2013 TMP. The 3 projects shown in gray indicate projects with conceptual alignments. The 2013 TMP also identified a subset of projects that were within the city's affordability envelope. The 2019 LRFP only included the 3 projects that were part of this affordable network and assumed 2/3 funding from senior levels of government in order to fit within the affordability levels at the time. Since 2013, when the TMP was approved, none of these projects have been completed and the 2/3 funding has not materialized. The revised estimates based on 2023 dollars has also increased significantly. Preliminary estimates coming out of the TMP updates just based on escalation and some refinement on scope have increased these costs even further. The next TMP will be developed by 2025. Much work has been done to date, but there is much more to come regarding growth and ridership and mode share projections and what the city's future transportation network could look like, while taking into consideration affordability for city and for developers. Next slide. $1 billion of the increase in the projected cost is due to the fact that 2023 LRFP update includes all of the transit priority projects in the 2013 TMP affordable network. Transit priority projects primarily include the cost of adding dedicated bus lanes where needed. In most instances, adding these lanes also helps to reduce operating costs over time. The affordable network was planned to be completed by 2031. So the LRFP assumes that there is a catch-up period and then a continuation of these projects post-2031. What is interesting to note is the dotted green line on this graph. It represents what we have actually spent each year on transit priority projects. A significant factor in the underspend is how much we were able to collect in development charges to pay for these projects. The transit development charge ceiling has primarily been taken up by LRT costs. Next slide. We are currently charging an insufficient amount for transit development charges. The 2023 affordability model update assumes a 25% increase in the transit development charges at a minimum, but this does not even cover the cost of stage 2. We have also included in this update the phase-in impact of Bill 23, which is why you see a dip every 10 years. Bill 23 requires a 5-year phase-in of development charge fees with every DC bylaw update, starting with 80% of fees, increasing by 5% each year to get to 100% of fees in 5 years. If we were to charge developers everything that the Transportation Master Plan identified for transit as needed for growth, the transit development charge would have to increase by more than the currently estimated 25%.
If we were to charge developers everything that was identified for public transit, our development charge would have to go up beyond the 25% that we're currently estimating.
In this unaffordable model, we become very reliant on DC debt, shown by the dark green bars, because there isn't enough cash to pay for the cost of growth that we are building now and in the future. Slide. Operating and capital funding for transit services is limited to very specific funding sources. To make transit services affordable going forward, we can increase those funding sources, but we can also decrease operating costs by reducing service, rescoping capital projects where requirements may have changed or addressed by other projects, and defer capital projects to a later date. This slide describes some of the key levers that have been identified by staff that are available to the city to address the current affordability issue. Only using one lever will not solve transit's affordability issues. The solution will require a combination of changes. Transit tax is one of those levers that has a compounding cumulative effect. For example, by increasing transit taxes by 6.4% in 2020, 4.6% in 2021, and 4.5% in 2022, we added $1.3 billion in revenue over the 30-year projection. An increase in 1 year gets increased again by the tax increase and also by the growth in each following year, thereby compounding the impact. By increasing the contribution to capital, we become less reliant on external sources of funding for our capital program. Transit fares pay for operating costs only. Transit tax pays for operating and capital. Currently, all transit tax revenue is used solely on operating and non-tangible capital spending. Tangible capital investments are only funded by transit debt, gas tax, and development charges. Our reliance on external sources of funding for our capital program does come with an element of risk, but we are extremely grateful to have this funding. For transit fares, we need to maintain the 2.5% increases annually at a minimum. Fare freezes similar to fare increases have a compounding effect. Reductions in operating costs are also a possible lever. A 10% reduction across all services, for example, would result in annual savings of $60 million. The question is where to reduce without impacting service. Stage 3 could be staged and delayed much further out in the forecast period, giving transit the opportunity to build back financial stability before taking on additional rail service. Or only part of Stage 3 could be implemented or replaced with rapid transit instead. Development charges must increase to align with growth investments approved by Council. Carling LRT could be changed to a BRT. Even Stage 3 could be replaced with BRT or transit priority lanes. Many decisions will need to be made over the next several years that will impact which levers we use and to what extent. Next slide. In addition to the levers described on the previous slide, we can advocate for new sources of funding or alternate revenue mechanisms to help fund transit. Council policies to expand the urban transit areas, the urban policy area defined in the official plan expands. There's a possibility that the urban transit area could be expanded over the next 25 years projected in the affordability model. As part of the 2019 budget, the province of Ontario announced that it would not be doubling the provincial gas tax contribution to municipalities, as had been announced by the previous government. The city has advocated for reinstating the doubling of the gas tax and should continue to do so. The city should continue to advocate for additional transit capital and operating funding. Government funding to date has primarily been for infrastructure capital funding. Funding is required for future LRT, BRT, transit priority projects, and other transit projects. Government funding for the cost of operating rail or bus would help to address the currently projected operating funding gap. Increased provincial funding for transit might be appropriate for a city our size. In the Toronto area, the province pays 100% of the capital and operating costs of longer distance service provided by GO Transit trains and buses, while here in Ottawa, similar service is funded 100% by the city. There are also options for other sources of revenue, some of which the city could charge and others that would require a change in municipal legislation and regulation, but which other municipalities are exploring. Next slide. The 2023 Transit Affordability Model update is for information purposes only. No decisions are required at this time on which key levers will need to be adjusted to ensure the ongoing affordability of the model. In this term of council, several plans and studies will be revised and developed to align with the city's transportation, growth, and climate change needs for the future, which will align with the new official plan. The Transportation Master Plan, the Transit Asset Management Plan, Development Charges Background Study, Transit-Oriented Development Plans, Stage 3 LRT, Zero Emission Bus Program, Climate Change Master Plan updates, and more. The 2023 Affordability Model update presented today is intended to set the baseline for assessing the affordability of those plans, as well as to identify the overall transit funding gap based on the Transportation Master Plan that was approved in 2013. The work to develop a revised and affordable plan has already begun, and this work will continue as part of the 2024 and 2025 annual budget process and culminate in a new transit asset plan and transportation master plan for the City of Ottawa in 2025. La mise à jour du modèle d'abordabilité 2023 présente
The 2023 update presented today is designed to set a baseline and to identify the overall deficit for public transit based on the master plan set out in 2013. Work to review the plan has already gotten underway and will continue during the 2024-25 budget process and will lead to a new plan in 2025.
And I look forward to answering any questions that you may have on the information presented today. Merci.
Thank you, Isabelle. Merci. We're now going to open the floor to councillor questions or designate for councillors who aren't able to be here today. So we'll go ward by ward, and Kendra from Media Relations has a microphone, so please wait for the microphone. We'll begin with Ward 1. I'm not sure if anyone, I don't see Councillor Luloff. Is anyone here from Councillor Luloff's office? I don't think so. Okay. We'll go to Ward 2, Councillor Dudas.
So this is an incredible amount of information to unpack. And I don't think that I'll ask anything particularly technical or logistical, because my understanding from the mayor's comments, and I appreciate that, is that we will have ample time to kind of dissect this going forward. I guess my question then is, I saw the next steps and all of the details we'll have to go through as councillors. Where do we go from here in terms of our residents? And I'm truly asking city staff this, as well as OC Transpo staff, because this is an incredible amount of decision-making that has been either delayed or we've known may have had to come. Some of these items will come up in the next couple of months. I understand, Isabel, you had mentioned that we'll be looking at the 2024, 2025. My understanding from seeing this is our budget discussions over the next couple of weeks will now be more a referendum on how we fund our transit system. We have so many competing items in our city, including affordable housing and, infrastructure renewal. This is so many important decisions, and we can't put them off until 2025. So I'm asking city staff, and maybe you don't have, I'm not actually anticipating an answer, is we need to understand how not only to have councillors informed so we're making the right decisions to get us back on track to affordability, but how we engage our residents and our transit users so that they, from a very knowledgeable way, are with us alongside making these decisions, because this is going to be immensely impactful in terms of not just our finances, but our OC Transpo operations and how we make these decisions going forward. So I don't actually know that there's a question in there, because I need to digest this information, but I think that this is going to be a very demanding conversation, not just on us as councillors, not just on city staff, but on our residents and our transit riders.
So, Councillor, maybe I'll just speak to that briefly, and staff can add anything they want to. You raise a lot of good points, and I think the scope of our work is enormous, but I would say that we don't have to solve all of this in the next 2 weeks, and that's the important thing to remember, is that we need to take this step by step. There's a really good book about writing called Bird by Bird by Annie Lamott, and the reason it's called Bird by Bird is because she tells a story about her brother having to do a project when he's in school, and he leaves it to the last minute, and it's a project about birds, and he's got to write descriptions of all these different birds, and he bursts into tears, and his father comes over and says, "You just got to take it bird by bird, buddy, bird by bird." So there are a bunch of things we need to do, and we need to approach those one step at a time, and if we tackle each of those decisions with the right framework in mind and with thoughtful discussion, and we take this step by step, we can resolve this one step at a time, but we're not going to fix it all in 2 weeks. That's my view anyway.
Thanks, Laura. Is Councillor Hill here, or anyone from his team? Okay, Councillor Curry.
Thank you very much. I am asking this question purely as the Canada North City Councillor, and I think maybe I'm asking this as well for Councillor Gower. Stage 3. So the special economic district that is Canada North is one of the main economic drivers for the City of Ottawa, with 13 billion GDP every year. We designate a special economic district because it has municipal, provincial, and federal importance to the country. So they are asking simply, if we are not going to continue with stage 3 right away, and it's fully dependent on provincial and federal funding 100%, is the city willing to work with the Canada North Business Association, Invest Ottawa, and the companies in the tech park to ensure that there is transit from other areas of the city, specifically from Bayshore and specifically within Canada North, to make sure that there is transit to the special economic district that we designated until we can actually get stage 3 up and running.
Renee.
Can try to take it.
I don't want another bird by bird. I loved it though.
Thank you very much. I think for sure, based on what Isabel just explained, if we cannot move forward with the stage 3, we will definitively review what we can do, as you know, if we can put in place some BRTs, which is much cheaper. So we will continue to see what we can do, but this is on our planning now, actually.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see Councillor Kelly. Is anyone here from Councillor Kelly's office? I don't think so. Councillor Kavanagh? Councillor Johnson?
Thank you very much. So I don't want to follow Councillor Curry's model here, but for me, coming up as well from College Ward and having Algonquin College as one of our institutions, I appreciate that the system is in a very dire strait, but as a city with many landmark institutions and with such a dependence on the tourism sector, I'm very concerned about how people will be able to confidently move around within the city for either tourism in the center that might be less impacted, but for local economic development everywhere. And students certainly have the least amount of flexibility when it comes to their employment. They're on, shift work. They're really relying on the bus system. And I wonder, I'm already constantly nagging Pat and Renee for the 88 and having some kind of special attention paid to those services for Algonquin College. I understand that we will have LRT stage 2, but it will have a cost to it. There's many more ways that people need to move around the city other than these spines. And I wonder if there's going to be another kind of mapping put onto the city when it comes to economic development or institutional significance to connect those places to one another. Because sometimes moving through the spines, as we see even right now, is part of what challenges the system, right? You've got transfers and delays on one end and they can't get to the other end safely. So is there another kind of essential map that we can layer on top of the network so that we can protect movement in other kinds of corridors?
I can perhaps speak to that. I think these are conversations that we'll be having as we move through the next phase of the Transportation Master Plan. And so there's a number of very important bus rapid transit and transit priority projects that have been previously identified. We'll be taking a look at those projects and looking at the ridership impacts. And part of the prioritization of those projects will be considering things like economic development, connectivity to destinations. And so all I can say at this point is just more to come, certainly lots of conversations that we expect to have over the next 2 years.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Devine.
Hello. I think we only have the one question, and I had similar questions of curiosity and concern about LRT stage 3 versus BRT. So I'll try to sneak in 2 questions, but was I to understand from that model there that on the assumption that LRT stage 3 is to be paid 100% by upper levels of government, that we are sticking with that plan because primarily it will lead towards increased ridership revenue? Obviously not just because that, I guess.
I don't think that's what Isabel said.
Then I'm gonna park that question only because I know that I want to have a great, sorry.
Well, yeah, just to clarify, I think we've always intended for stage 3 to be funded by other levels of government because we don't have the financial capacity to do it. And that's what they're doing in other cities, frankly. So I think we've always expected that. It doesn't I think the presentation indicated that we were never expecting a big bump in ridership from stage 3, but that it was a matter of completing the system from, to Barrhaven, Stittsville, and Canada.
Thank you. And then just my other question. So I'm certainly not a financial expert by any stretch of the imagination, but as I understood, one of the many factors that have impacted where we are currently is the spike in interest rates. However, the interest rates that we recently enjoyed are historically low. And so if this long-term plan dating back to 2013, I can't imagine it would have anticipated historically low interest rates. So I'd like to hope that as we are now returning towards hopefully not our parents' interest rates, but more historically normal interest rates, will our next long-range plan be based on, because it feels like we were lacking a stress test over where interest rates likely were heading all this long, lovely past decade. For the next long-range plan, are we basing those plans on more realistic and conservative interest rates?
I'd have to say that interest rates were not a huge factor in the changes between 2019 and now. And in 2019, we were experiencing very low interest rates, but we were very conservative in our estimation of interest rates going forward, and we're right around the same range. It actually, we're projecting a little bit lower, but not much. It's pretty much on par. It's just more in terms of what we're, interest rates weren't a huge factor.
Councillor Bradley.
Can I just may I just
for
ask
sure.
a follow-up to that? Just is it fair to say, Isabel, that the variability of interest rates is more a factor if you're doing a short-term forecast than a 25-year forecast? Because over 25 years, it's almost inevitable that there will be some years of higher interest rates and some years of lower interest rates, so it kind of averages out the longer the period. Is that fair to say?
Correct. And we're estimating approximately 4.25% going forward. So it's at that high for the 30 years. The biggest factor was inflation over the last, so it ended up changing the trajectory. And so we're still estimating 3% inflation going forward, but it just bumped up the baseline.
Councillor Bradley.
Thank you for that. And thank you to staff. And thank you, Mr. Mayor and Chair Gower, for bringing this information to Council ahead of schedule. We appreciate the preview despite its grim nature. I have a ton of questions, and I know now is not the time to get into the weeds. I assume this presentation will be sent to Council. Perfect. So I'll just focus really high level. There was a lot of conversation today about engagement with our federal and provincial partners. I guess what I'm interested in and what is our engagement strategy going forward to highlight this to our federal and provincial partners? Will you be doing this presentation with them? What will you be doing at the staff level? What will you be doing at the political level? How will progress be communicated to Council? Because a lot of the financial assistance, if we get it, will come from our federal and provincial partners. And if it doesn't come, we have tough decisions to make as a council. So, I don't want to wait until the next budget to cross our fingers and hope that they'll shore up our operating deficits again. I want to, have that information in advance. So a lot of questions in there, I guess, but really it's about an engagement strategy and communication to council so that we can make informed decisions.
So I'll start by saying I think it's all of the above. I think the engagement's going to happen at the staff level, at the level of senior leadership, at the political level. It's there will be formal and informal parts of it. So, I've already had informal conversations with key people in both the federal and provincial governments to plant the idea with them that our needs are significant and that I feel our requests are justified. So I think there'll be a combination of all kinds of things. I don't think it's wise to. I think I'm happy to share many elements of the strategy with councillors and keep you up to date every step of the way. I don't think it's always wise to share the details of an engagement strategy publicly because there are nuances to it, but happy to share it with councillors individually.
Councillor Tierney or Councillor Plante, anyone here from their offices? Okay, Councillor King.
Thank you so much. I'd also like to thank the mayor and the chair for this opportunity. Just really have a question about process. I was just wanting to understand the timeline for establishing the internal working group of councillors and whether that would be tied to the direction around mitigation options.
Well, I can say we are developing, finalizing a direction to staff, whether that comes to council or to a committee. We're intending to do that in the next few weeks. And exactly what that group looks like, we're still in discussion on that. I think the idea is certainly to have councilor involvement, but also to bring together all the different people on staff who have a role in this, whether this is the financial department, OC Transpo, transportation with Jennifer and Vivi's group, planning as well, because land use is also critical to ridership. So bringing all these groups together, there are a lot of meetings happening separately. And I think what the mayor and I have been talking about is we need to make sure everybody is communicating and that we're moving things forward at a good pace, right? This is not something we can wait 2 or 3 years to get a report back. It needs to keep moving along. So the mayor and I have been working on what that direction is going to look like and what that group will look like, and welcome any feedback from colleagues as well. Councillor Troster, I haven't seen her today. Anyone from her staff? Councillor Leeper, I know he's got another engagement this morning. Councillor Brockington.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks very much for the presentation. It's excellent, despite, as others have said, challenging to get our heads wrapped around at this time. Many questions as well, but I just want to focus on LRT Phase 3 versus bus rapid transit corridors. We could probably get 5 corridors done and still have money left over before we even consider Phase 3. And a Phase 3, to everyone's admission, is not going to be big on bringing in sort of a net increase of riders, but bus ridership is far greater right now than rail. And I think there's some strong merits in us considering what the priorities for us going forward are. So how do we have that discussion? Because people are still talking about Phase 3 as the next big capital project. And yet we know that there will be significant benefits if BRT corridors get built in the various arterials in the city. So again, not looking for an answer today, but some of us are saying different things and we need to be sort of rowing in the same direction. So how does that get incorporated into future decision making? When do we have those key decision or discussions on capital projects?
So again, I think that's going to be part of the conversation around the TMP update and looking at the prioritization of projects. I mean, there's been environmental assessments completed for stage 3. There's a demonstrated need for those projects, but it becomes a matter of prioritization. And so those conversations will come as we proceed with the next steps of that project.
Councillor Menard.
Thank you very much. And I was listening online and seeing the presentation online. So thank you for the presentation. A lot of information there and a lot we're going to have to work through as a council. I think we're in this position because of things that were out of our control, but also some things that were in our control. And I think acknowledging past mistakes is important because that's how you fix them. And so I think we've been making some mistakes on transit. I think that we chose a litigious public-private partnership for our LRT, which did cost us dearly in terms of confidence in the system. We've been raising fares at a rapid pace. They've gone up quite a lot. We have very high fares compared to the rest of North America. We are also doing things like previously we did route optimizations. Route optimizations or some cuts, which happened from those, were received poorly by the public and affected reliability at that time. Cutting buses with the introduction of LRT, when you know you need increased connections to LRT, those are things that occurred. And of course, the revealing public inquiry, which talked about transparency. I know we're trying to change that now, and I see a difference on transparency, but those are things that we're dealing with. And it's important not to hide those. And so I guess what I'm trying to get to is what's going to fix our problems, right? Because it's easy to sit here and just criticize the past. So what are the actual solutions to this problem? What's going to fix it? I don't think it's going to just be a small kind of route optimization. I don't think it's going to be through capital reductions. I don't think it's going to be through more fare increases while we've had unreliable service. That's likely not going to do it. But after all we've been through, we probably need to listen to some different voices in the city, right? We've been through a lot. We've been listening to a lot of voices, but not different voices in what I'm hearing. And we need a big shift. And so my proposal for a big shift is on both funding transit and aggressive actions to encourage ridership on the backbone of our transportation network. After everything we've been through, why aren't we making the hard but necessary choices to try something new? Isn't this the exact time we should be doing that? The climate crisis is here. It's not fake, it's real. It's affecting us every single week, every single month. We're experiencing what's happened as a result of climate change. We need to invest in reliability. Congestion is only going to increase. We need to lower the cost drastically to take the bus. We're not going to get there with decreases in reliability and large increases in fares. Not going to happen. After everything that we've been through with the LRT inquiry, the amount of media on this, North America's looking at us, it's time for a big shift in Ottawa, a paradigm shift. And we're not going to get there with the same old, same old. So I'm encouraging you to think big about transit. Do the hard things. That's going to involve the transit levy. It's going to involve the RTA in the urban areas and the rural areas A and B. It's going to involve things like BRT lines. And I know we're doing some of that planning now. We need to shift away from LRT stage 3 and focus on BRT, as the chair has said as well. But we're not going to get there with more fare increases. And we're not going to get there with reduced reliability. So shift that. Put it on its head. Try something new, or we're going to maintain in this exact same position we've been in for a long time. I'm really asking you, the time is now. The LRT inquiry was massive for this city, and it showed the problems we have to fix. And I want us to think bigger in terms of how we're going to fix those problems. So it's not a question, because I heard you talk a lot this morning and this afternoon, and I appreciate all that information. It was fantastically presented. It paints the picture, what we have to deal with. Other orders of government have to come to the table, certainly, but we also have to get our house in order, and it's not going to happen through the same old here. So we have a chance here to do something really big in Ottawa, and I hope we take that chance. Mayor, you may want to comment. I don't know, or staff may want to comment, but it's more of a comment for me. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Carr.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the presentation. I'll say I noted, Mr. Mayor, when you spoke about the uniqueness of Ottawa in terms of two elements, one being the federal government decisions or lack thereof, and the other being the a different funding model. I'm wondering, is the fact that we're 2,800 square kilometers and that we've got rail lines that have to go all across the city as we're building out these stages, and the fact that we have such a big rural component where we have different urban transit area, if that factors in, do you feel that that factors into our uniqueness at all when we're making these decisions?
I'm happy to hear a more technical answer, but I'll give my own personal view on that. Yes, absolutely. You know, I always chuckle when people come back from a place like Paris and say, oh, you know, Paris has this many different, you know, light rail lines or subway lines or whatever, or they come back from some other European city. And when you look at the numbers, you know, we have 1 million people spread out over 2,800 square kilometers. Paris has 10 million people in 100 square kilometers. So they have the density that allows for a completely different model for delivering services to their residents, including transit, many other things. We have a much more challenging environment. We have a lot more ground to cover, and that affects the cost of all the services that we deliver, for sure.
Thank you. Madam Alcaf.
Just to say basically the same as the mayor said. Ottawa has long distances to travel. You know, the way the city has been designed includes the green belt, which means that everyone traveling from some parts of the city has several more kilometers to travel than they would in a city that didn't have a green belt, but that's part of the design of the city. The political structure of the city to include so much rural territory and the same municipality puts us in a different position than other big cities in Canada. And as Isabel said earlier, the
decision at the provincial level that all public transit in Ottawa is funded municipally, whereas in the Toronto area, it's funded jointly by the province and by the municipalities. The province taking the longer trips, and the city is doing the local distribution.
Yeah, no, that's a really important point. And I think, the province is obviously uniquely positioned to develop a funding model that applies to all the municipalities using transit across Ottawa. And I certainly hope I understand when Councillor Bradley asked the point that you don't want to give an update on how those discussions are going. The one other just quick question that I wanted to ask is, obviously this is a problem that you talked about. All cities are facing this all across North America with the changes in work and the financial situation. And so I was really interested when it looks at options on the slide where you're actually looking at options to potentially seek funding within the mobility industry itself. So whether that be, tolls, land value capture, all of that. Are there other models in North America that are looking at these options as a source of revenue?
So I believe Toronto has provided a list of different options that they have more flexibility than we do, and they're also looking at different revenue options. That we looked at it a long time ago. We have a white paper on different revenue. We have to dust those things off and start looking at them a little bit more deeply, but we have not purposely looked at them in a concentrated effort, but we need to look at those going forward.
Okay, and their flexibility comes from the Toronto Act, the greater flexibility, does it?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. I'll go to Councillor Kitts.
Councillor Kitts.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for the presentation. Lots of information to digest, so I feel like I'll have follow-up questions, but unsurprisingly, I'm taking a growth lens to this. There was a lot of BRTs on that screen. It sounds like, even if we do shift away from stage 3, they're probably not all going to be able to get funded in a timely fashion. So I think this is a question directed at Jennifer, but how do we square that circle? Because when the BRTs are on a plan, it acts as a planning rationale for increased density, even when we know that they're not going to get built. So I guess in regards to the TMP process that's coming up, are we going to be looking at reducing the number of planned BRTs, or how are we going to address how transit ridership and the availability of connectivity impacts our growth strategy?
So as part of the Transportation Master Plan process, there will be another update to the Transit Long Range Financial Plan. And I anticipate that it'll be a bit of an iterative process where we're looking at, here's the needed projects and what are the ridership implications of that? What does that mean in terms of affordability? But then looking, taking the results of that long range financial plan and applying our prioritization to come back with a scaled list of projects that are the highest priority ones. Again, what does that mean in terms of ridership? How does that impact the long range financial plan? And so it will be a process that we go through to identify all of the needs, but then coming back with a subset of projects that does fit within an affordability model.
Okay, thank you for that. And then building on Councillor Carr's question, is there a city of comparable size and geography that we could look to? Because, there's a lot of cities that don't fit the model, but is there one that exists that Ottawa is similar? Because I think that is one of our greatest challenges, is just the geography.
Maybe I can take this question. Thank you. I will come back to you because we have access with a lot of transit and we're doing benchmarking, so we can come back. But as the mayor said, the model here is unique. Yeah. Frankly, it's even, the buses here, we pay the buses 100%. In Montreal, it's 85% from the provincial, 15% from the municipal. So it's so different, but I can come back absolutely with some data on that.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor DeRuse, don't think he's here. Councillor Brown.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you for the presentation today. I really appreciate hearing about the vastness of Ottawa and how large it is and some of the challenges and benefits that brings. Specifically, I'm concerned about expanding the urban transit area into rural Ottawa to help pay for the service. What I'm hearing is we have an urban transit problem and we're just going to ask others to pay for that. I have two questions in the same vein. One, if you extend the urban transit area into rural Ottawa, will they see that commensurate level of service increase? And are we looking at inviting private sector partners into rural Ottawa to help service the transit needs of rural villagers, similar to what all of the smaller townships around Ottawa currently do?
There's a number of questions that need to be answered to answer that, that question. There's so much behind it, and most of it is history. To work backwards on the easier question, when transit service was delivered by the more rural municipalities before amalgamation, some of that was done by private contractors. And post-amalgamation, some of the service was delivered by private contractors. And then council made decisions over the early years after amalgamation to bring some of those services in-house and operate them with city staff to give a little more cost certainty, and at that time what was seen as being a better quality of service than the equipment that was provided by the private contractors. On the first question of what is the quid pro quo if taxes are increased in rural areas so that they contribute towards the cost of running the urban part of the system, I think that's that's totally a political decision, but it needs to be informed by the number of people who live in rural areas or indeed live outside the City of Ottawa who either use the urban transit system or benefit from the existence of the urban transit system, and who currently contribute to the cost of operating and building that system only through the fares they pay and not through their property taxes. So it's a discussion that may well happen, and to answer it needs to happen.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Desroches.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, staff, and Councillor Gower for the presentation. I've often thought that instead of having a state of the city, we need a state of OC Transpo, State of the Union. And today it's just that, and it's a very stark and sobering presentation, but an important one, and a difficult conversation that we're going to have with all the residents of the City of Ottawa, not just transit riders. Whether you're paying the gas tax or you're paying a property bill, you need to be part of that conversation. So I hope that this brings all residents to the table to have this very challenging conversation. I can't think of a more critical time to have good, solid, nonpartisan interaction with the federal and provincial governments. And we have to take a tone just like AMO does and FCM does to have these nonpartisan conversations with the federal and provincial governments on a long list of issues that we see as kind of holding back our transit and preventing us from moving forward. One of those areas is on regulatory oversight, right? And we fall under that federal regulatory oversight, which leads to costs that other transit authorities in Ontario don't have. So whether that be the scheduling or whether that be, I think, some of the recent technical changes to the trains that really, if you had a train in Toronto, that you wouldn't have it in Ottawa. So just wondering if you can comment either on how we can better enumerate and show to people that this federal oversight doesn't really fit us, it adds costs. And maybe we should be, again, because this is longer term, looking at whether this system should be under provincial oversight so that we're kind of apples to apples with other jurisdictions and not having costs that are maybe applicable to Canadian National Railways, but not an urban transit system in Ottawa. Thanks.
Not sure if you wanted to answer that, but yes, I think I think we should look at that for sure.
Councillor Hubley, I don't think is here. Councillor Lowe, thank you for your patience.
No problem. In October, you said I was going to
Next
go
time we'll
first.
start with number 24 and
yeah,
go
I
to
mean,
one.
you did say that in November already. No, thank you. Thank you for this. So I kind of want to echo some of the points that some of my colleagues who went before me have spoken to. So I am really
the biggest concern is pushing our UTA expenses into the rural transit areas where the service is not accessible to them at all, right? It's one thing to make people pay for services that are available to them, but they may not use. But when it's actually not available to them, it's a completely different story. The other thing is, I noticed that in one of the graphs where you have your 4 lines projecting future revenue, future pressures, there's no contingency or no, it doesn't seem like that we've looked at a situation where transit ridership and therefore revenue stagnates or declines as a result of outside pressures that change again, or our decisions or whatever. So is that something that is factored, or are we kind of just looking more optimistically here in terms of things going up?
So we looked at the 5 scenarios, and we looked at the very high impact scenario where we're not getting back to normal until 10 years. So that was a very dramatic change from where we were in 2019. If you looked at the line from 2019, it's significantly different. So we're trying to re-vector based on this new line. If we were going to re-vector on a worst case scenario, we wouldn't be building the transit that we need.
Okay, understood. And so second question, last question, is around a lot of the capital investments we're making. And this kind of goes back to before we were in council. We were very fixated on rapid transit. We're very fixated on high order rapid transit and not on developing, doesn't seem like it rather, that we're not developing good local service to kind of generate that demand to therefore justify investing in these corridors. Chapman Mills is a great example in my ward. We built that really nice busway in the middle of a residential street, and a bus runs every 30 minutes in that area maybe. So, I think we need to look at or change the way we're looking at how we're planning this stuff. Like bring in the local service, bring in the ridership, and therefore the revenue, so that we're not relying on these expensive investments to introduce transit service into those communities and then have that kind of lag in that ridership and revenue once these things are introduced. So not really a question, eh? Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Worth mentioning too, Councillor Lowe and Renee Amelkar and myself, we're all attending tomorrow's CUTA. Maybe there's other Councillor Brockington as well. This is an assembly of a whole bunch of transit associations from across Canada here in Ottawa, and part of the ongoing, networking, education, and also advocacy to the federal government around some of the challenges we've been talking about here today. So I think this update's timed well leading into that this week. So that's the end of our councillor questions. Thank you, colleagues, for that. We're going to take about a 15-minute break, maybe a little bit less, and reset for the media. Nous prenons maintenant une pause.
So we're going to take a break, and then we'll be answering media questions.
Welcome back, everyone. My name is Kendra Titley, and I'll be today's moderator. Je serai votre modératrice aujourd'hui. I will now invite each agency to ask their questions in alphabetical order. You may ask one question with a follow-up. Nous allons maintenant répondre aux questions des médias qui pourront poser une question et une question de suivi. When asking your questions, please identify who your question is directed to, and please use the microphone provided. Lorsque vous posez vos questions, veuillez indiquer à qui s'adresse votre question et veuillez le faire au micro. We'll now start with Elise Skura at CBC Ottawa.
Thanks very much. So my first question is for the mayor. I'm just wondering, obviously this is not the most optimistic outlook and not something that riders really want to see and people in Ottawa really want to see. Considering that kind of the trust in the system seems to be low right now from what people are telling us, how do you kind of convince people that these bigger steps need to be taken, more funding, tax, these kinds of hard options?
I would, first of all, I would say, I understand why people have concerns about the system. I think we are seeing evidence that lots of people are using the system though. So for example, there was a day in the last 2 weeks where we had the highest ridership on line 1 in almost a year. So people are using the system, they're using public transit. They may be frustrated, as I am, with many of the developments that have happened over the last few years, and they may not be ready to fully trust the system going forward, and that's why we need to do a better job. I think we are building a public transit system for the next 25 years. I think in a few years from now, when the city has grown even more, and when people see the backbone of line 1 and line 2 in our city and the role that they will play in economic development and tourism and where we build homes and businesses in the future, it will be looked back upon as something that had some stumbles, but was an important city building project. So I'm confident that in the long run, we can make the right decisions around public transit, around how it will be funded and supported, and how it will serve the residents of Ottawa, because public transit is vitally important to our city.
Could you also answer in French?
Alors, je sais que les résidents d'Ottawa.
I realize that the Ottawa residents don't really fully trust our public transit system, especially the LRT. But we're also seeing lots of people using the LRT now. We've had a couple of days with more passengers than the 10 previous months. I think in the coming years, we will be building a transit system which will be crucial for Ottawa residents. Now, we have lots of opportunity to take the right decisions to support public transit, because public transit is vital for the local economy and for Ottawa in general.
My next question is perhaps more better directed at staff, but I'm just wondering, the mayor had mentioned that perhaps we would get more detailed report in Q2 2024. Is that right? Is that what you said in your opening statement?
So I think what Councillor Gower and I are discussing now is a direction to staff and some requests. And one of them would be to further develop all the different ways we could mitigate this funding gap. And obviously that requires some work. And so we're hoping that by the end of Q2 next year, we would have more detail on what those different mitigation strategies could look like.
Right. And so given that, I'm just wondering, and knowing that these are compounding and cumulative effects of some of these mitigations, how quickly could we get something rolled out while ensuring that the public is able to have some kind of say in it?
I don't think it's one conversation that's going to happen and we make a bunch of decisions and then we're done. I think the job we have in front of us has not actually changed that much for the next 6 months to 2 years. We have to fix phase 1 of light rail. We have to make sure that phase 2 of light rail is introduced smoothly and effectively and that it's working. We have to improve our bus system so that it's serving residents in the areas where they need it and not where they don't. We have to make difficult decisions about how we pay for public transit. So that part really hasn't changed. We just have more information, and all the decisions we make over the next 10 years will change the picture for the next 25 years. And so I don't think it's one conversation and one plan. I think it's a series of discussions and decisions over the next few years.
Great. Could you say that in French as well?
Oui.
Thank you.
Alors, ce n'est que le début.
Well, this is just a start. There are many decisions that need to be made. Each decision is important, but it's not just one decision and one single plan that'll resolve the issues we're facing. We have lots of decisions to make over the coming months. Over the next 6 months to 2 years, in fact. So it's very important in the coming 2 years to restore trust and to deal with the issues facing phase 1, and that we deploy phase 2 as quickly as possible. We have to, of course, make changes so that the bus system better serves residents as well.
Thank you, merci. We'll now go to Leah Larocque at CTV Ottawa.
And winner of the 10K at the Army Run. Woohoo. Congratulations.
Thank you. So I can chase all you counselors and everything for answers.
As long as it's not 11K.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Good luck in your marathon coming up. Seems like one of the big things that came out of today was stage 3 and the future of it. So I'm not sure if maybe the mayor or Isabel can comment. To put bluntly, what are the chances of it getting built? Is now stage 3 pretty much a pipe dream for our city right now? And if you just hold on so I can move my camera.
Well, I can go first if you want, since your camera's seems already to be pointed at me. Do you want me looking at you though? Or? Yeah. Okay. So I still believe that we can deliver phase 3 to the residents of Barrhaven, Stittsville, and Canada. I think it's an important part of the system, and our population is going to grow significantly over the next 25 years. We know that. So we're not ready to push the button on phase 3 this week anyway. So we have a lot of work to do before we get to a point of making a decision about phase 3. So we have to do that work, and we have to have the important conversations with other levels of government, because we were always counting on other levels of government to pay the cost of phase 3 anyway. Well, we're not ready. We were never going to start spending money on phase 3 in 2023 or 2024 anyway. So a lot of what we're planning to do at this moment is unaffordable, and that's not just phase 3, but many other things that you saw listed. Operating OC Transpo is a challenge right now. We have an operating deficit for 2023 and an operating deficit for 2024. So we have to make a lot of decisions that will improve the financial picture. And if we can do that, then we'll be ready to talk about phase 3. But I still believe that phase 3 is an important part of our future plans. If you want to add anything, you don't have to.
See, there's not much more to add, I think, to that response. We will be looking at all of the rapid transit projects as part of the next phase of the transportation master plan. And as I mentioned earlier, we expect there to be lots of conversations around all of those various projects.
Do you have a follow-up? Yes. Okay.
Yeah, sure. Just so people at home can.
Perhaps, Madame Elmakar, you can ask, just looking at those numbers, there's a lot of red. So if I'm a rider or a transit user at home and I see this presentation and I see all the red and possibilities of increased fare hikes, so will riders continue to pay higher transit fees with less service? Is this going to be the future for riders? in the coming years?
I used to say that here in Ottawa, we're very, very lucky because we have a fantastic network that will be prepared for future, for sure. So we just need to cross that river, and it will be a tough run. However, I believe that we will find a solution. We have to make tough decision for sure. We will need to work with the team as well. But I think in 25 years, people will be very, very proud that Ottawa was on top of everything and has been proactive. But it's tough now, for sure.
Thank you. Nous allons maintenant Julien Paquette à la droite.
Julien Paquette from Le Droit newspaper. Hello. There were discussions last week on short-term funding. We're talking about long-term funding today. I don't know who is the best place to answer this question, but we're talking about mitigation decisions and tough decisions that need to be made over the next 6 months to 2 years. What about next year, though? To avoid replicating the situation this year with a very high deficit. What type of short-term mitigation measures are you thinking about taking to manage the situation? Thank you for your question. Well, we're going through the exercise. Now, we've been working on the 2023 budget since last year. We've already started developing a budget for 2024. There are lots of things that we're working on currently. As I said earlier, it's going to be tough, but we'll get there. We're going to have to make difficult decisions because ridership is not up to what we expected, but what we're doing will pay off in the short term. It'll also pay off in the long term as well. A question from Mr. Mayor. In the scenarios that were put forward to deal with the situation, one of them is to extend the transit tax zone being extended. How do you feel about that? Well, I wouldn't support that solution currently because rural residents don't have the same level of service as people in the downtown core do. So for me, it's not a solution to ask them to pay for a system they don't have access to. So that's not my preferred choice, really.
We'll now go to Blair Crawford at the Ottawa Citizen.
Yes, so this is for the mayor as well. In your remarks at the beginning, you talked about how the provincial and federal governments must or simply must provide funding for Ottawa. Can you elaborate on that, exactly what you're looking for? And this is just for day-to-day operations, not phase 3 you're talking about there.
It's everything. And I think Ottawa is justified in asking for help from the federal government and the provincial government because of the unique circumstances of being the nation's capital and the fact that federal government decisions have had an impact on transit ridership in Ottawa and frankly on the future of downtown. And so we have a federal government that is talking about moving out of many of its downtown buildings, which is going to present a significant challenge for us as a community. So we're going to need support from the federal government on a number of different levels because of the decisions that they've taken. I respect those decisions. Those are their decisions to take, but there are consequences that will be felt at the municipal level because of those decisions. And similarly, I would say we have a conversation that we're having with the provincial government because we don't get the same deal as Toronto and other cities in the GTA when it comes to funding transit operations and maintenance and life cycle. The provincial government pays for a lot more of that in other municipalities than it does in Ottawa, and that's got to change in the future.
I'll come back to a question I asked last week as well about the 2.5% cap on the transit levy, and things have changed since a year ago when you were elected. Do you still think that it's reasonable to expect OC Transpo to limit its budget increase to 2.5%, given what we've heard today?
We're looking at the budget, and the budget's not finalized, but for 2024, we're looking at solutions that don't involve increasing the transit levy. And so I'm optimistic that will be the outcome of the 2024 budget process. And as I've said many times, the goal of City Council, the goal that Council voted on several years ago was to have transit riders and taxpayers paying a roughly equal share of the cost of public transit in Ottawa, and we're nowhere near that goal at this point. So we need to keep working towards that. But for 2024, I'm still optimistic that we can keep the transit levy at that level.
Thank you.
Thank you. This concludes today's media availability. Ceci conclut le point de presse d'aujourd'hui. Thank you.